So I'm Lorraine Hartman, and I wanted to give you a very warm welcome and a thank you for coming. I am the chair of the Our Lady of the Lake Justice and Peace Committee, and I'm here to introduce Father John on behalf of all the event sponsors: Church Council of Greater Seattle, Fellowship of Reconciliation, Seattle Chapter, Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action, Our Lady of the Lake Justice and Peace Committee, University Temple United Methodist Church, and the Wedgwood Justice and Peace Coalition. Peace seekers and peacemakers all, we're honored by the presence of Father John, internationally known prophetic voice for peace and nonviolence, nominated by Archbishop Desmond Tutu for the Nobel Peace Prize. John is author, editor of 30 books, including his autobiography, A Persistent Peace, and his most recent, and a focus of tonight's talk, The Nonviolent Life, both of which are outside for sale, and his autograph. And he joined the staff of Pace e Bene Nonviolent Service in 2013. He's also written hundreds and hundreds of articles. John's commitment to gospel nonviolence is uncompromising. He is action-oriented, accepting the consequences. He attracts fellow prophetic voices here tonight, people like biblical scholar Wes Howard Brooke and opponent of Iraq sanctions and war Bert Sachs, pastors like Father Timothy Clark and Reverend Rich Lang, Pax Christi members who have professed the vow of nonviolence, which John co-authored in the 1980s, members of the Seattle chapter of Fellowship of Reconciliation. John was the national director of FOR, which is the largest U.S. interfaith peace organization. People working toward the abolition of nuclear weapons, like those present from Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action next to the Bangor Naval Station, home base of a good chunk of the U.S. Trident subfleet and well over 1,000 nuclear weapons. He has spent months of his life in prison for opposing nuclear weapons and has been arrested over 75 times for his peace work. John's guides are people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, Thérèse of Lisieux, St. Francis, and friends he has known or knows in the flesh, like Mother Teresa, Cesar Chavez, Desmond Tutu, Dom Helder Camara, Thich Nhat Hanh, Mayred Maguire, Dan and Phil Berrigan, Joan Baez, Martin Sheehan. His meticulous discipline toward intimacy with Jesus shines through, as does his conviction that Jesus sent from God is nonviolent and that we, God's beloved children, thus should be nonviolent, countercultural though that is.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out and being here tonight. And it's wonderful to be back in Seattle. I don't feel a bit sorry for you living in Seattle. It's so wonderful. I just flew in from New Mexico, and there's no water and nothing green. It's really exciting to be here. A big thank you to Rich, the University Temple United Methodist Church, and Father Tim and Miriam, Our Lady of the Lake, and most especially Lorraine and the committee for bringing me in. How about a big round of applause? Lorraine, thank you. And everybody in the committee for bringing me here. And it's so nice to see so many friends and to hear about all the great things you're doing with Pax Christi and Ground Zero and FOR and all these various troublemaking groups. And I'm just very, very heartened and just want to say thank you. You know, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, every one of you, for everything you're doing for justice and peace and for the God of justice and peace and our poor churches and poor Jesus and the poor world. And I just want to encourage you to keep at it. And, looking at all you holy Seattle peacemakers, I'm nervous and reminded with this kind of funny contraption of the story of the young priest giving his first sermon, and he's very nervous, and he comes to the microphone, and he's have to give his sermon, and he sees the people, and he taps on the microphone and says, "Something's wrong with this microphone," and the congregation goes, "And also with you." I'm sorry, it's my best joke. This is my only joke. It's going to be downhill from there. I'm sorry if you've heard me before. I just love that joke, which is actually a true story. I'm just back from South Africa in the middle of all the troubles I've got going on in my life. And, it's a lifelong dream to go there. Many of you probably worked to oppose apartheid. And I don't know that I, maybe like you, could have gotten in earlier. I went with my friend Father Ray, and we went everywhere and met everybody. Johannesburg and Soweto, and went to the churches that had been the sister parishes that I worked at from Washington, D.C., inner city D.C., in the 1980s. And to go to those places and meet people and visit Winnie Mandela, whom I had corresponded with in the 80s, and she remembered me, and it was just thrilling. And then we went to Pietermaritzburg. Now, how many of you know you're a Gandhi? You remember the beginning of the Gandhi movie? He gets thrown off the train because he's sitting in the first class, and it's midnight, and he's dropped in the middle of nowhere in South Africa. He's only been there for a week, and he's a dopey 21-year-old kid. And he's left in the waiting room of the Pietermaritzburg train station in 1893. And it's really scary, and it's cold, and he sits on the floor till 9 a.m., and he knows this is it. What am I going to do about this injustice? And he stands up, and he wrote in his autobiography, "My act of nonviolence began that day. We went to the train station." I know it's a little over the top, but it's the same train station since 1893, the goofy old orange brick Victorian building, the same tiled roof, the same waiting room. And we prayed there. It was so powerful that we could have a portion of Gandhi's spirit, all of us, to stand up and give our lives fighting injustice like he did. Then we went to Durban to go to the ashram that Gandhi built, which is still there, and he lived there for 20 years, where he began the movement. And then we went down to Port Elizabeth to visit the home of Steve Biko, who was a personal, real hero for me. And I think at the heart of South Africa, in many ways more than Mandela, for what he did, his vision of black consciousness, of being a human being. Went to the house where he was banned and then prayed at his grave. And we made our way to Cape Town to Robben Island and spent a day there and praying in Mandela's cell. And then I spent a day with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And there's a lot of archbishops who don't like me. I'm just saying. I don't know why. There's just a lot of archbishops who don't welcome me. He catered a meal for me and brought all his friends in. I felt like the prodigal son. We had a Eucharist together. And he says to me, which I say to you, "We can never give up working for justice and peace, John," he said, looking me up. "Never. We have to work at this till the day we die, because our sisters and brothers are dying around the world." That's a solemn message I share with you. He's 82. He's been under death threat practically every day since he was 13. I don't know how well you know his story. And he's been ill, and he was leaving for Iran the next day, which is no joke. He's causing so much trouble in South Africa at the moment, speaking out against the corruption in the ANC and so forth. So powerful. And if some of you know me, and that's why he's on to me long ago. I'm going, "Oh, come on, Archbishop. Give me a break. How do you do it?" And he looks me in the eye and he goes, "I weep. I cry. I cry every single day about what's happening to our sisters and brothers. And I laugh I laugh every single day. And I read the prophet Jeremiah, and he weeps, and he laughs, and he goes and confronts the empire. And that's what I want to do. I'm sharing that teaching with you. Isn't that great? He's not a raging, angry man, nor is he afraid, nor is he despairing, nor is he depressed. He's grieving, and he's joyful, and he's going forward. Are there any questions? No, it's such a helpful thing. Friends, we are not powerless. We have a power to change ourselves and Seattle and our country and the world if we dare live up to it. The way of God, which is the methodology of nonviolence, which Gandhi and Dr. King have proved, and we're working on too with Archbishop Tutu and so many others. I encourage you, don't give up, and don't be depressed, and don't despair, don't be afraid, and don't sit back and do nothing just because things are so hard. We've got a way forward, and we've got to try. And that's what I'd like to reflect with you a little bit. Maybe share a story or two and a little bit about violence and nonviolence. And, I've been talking about my new book, The Nonviolent Life. I know I'm stuck on a message, but I think Gandhi and King are right, that nonviolence is the only hope for the world. And I've been trying with you to reflect on what that means. So I want to share what I've been thinking about that. Maybe say a word about Jesus, and then we have time for question and answers, Rich, and then we will resolve everything. How does that sound as a plan? Yeah. Well, so for those of you who don't know me, or maybe you do, I don't know, but I'm 54 and was, really my change happened when I was 21 and decided to go on a hitchhiking pilgrimage through Israel, and had left the week Israel invaded Lebanon, and all the Holy Land tours were canceled. The Summer War of 1982, you maybe remember that, Rich. It was called Operation Peace for Galilee. It was orchestrated at the Pentagon. We killed 60,000 people. And I hitchhiked through Israel, completely oblivious to everything, and spent a week camping out illegally at the Sea of Galilee, which was so beautiful and so exciting. There was nobody there, 1982. And I was really reading the Sermon on the Mount for the first time and visiting the Chapel of the Beatitudes. And it still shakes me. I walked into that church, maybe you've been there, on the North Shore, that little hill, that little church. And I always say it was like graffiti as far as I was concerned. Written on the walls of the church. Can you imagine they did this? Blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. That doesn't sound good. Blessed are the meek, the gentle, the nonviolent. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those persecuted for working for justice. On the altar, love your enemies. And not being very bright, I thought to myself, oh my God, I think this guy's serious. And it was, standing on the balcony, grappling with these texts, that I saw these jets swoop down from the sky, breaking the sound barrier, setting off all these sonic booms, flying over me in the Chapel of the Beatitudes and dropping bombs. And it changed my life. I got to see war at the Sea of Galilee, at the place where Jesus did, blessed are the peacemakers, and love your enemies. And like you, I decided, right, I'm going to try to get with the program. And I don't know how to do it, but with you, I'm on the journey. And that's what I find helpful, that living the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount and the way of nonviolence and peace, love, and compassion is a journey, and we're on it together toward a whole new world of peace. Where are you on the road to peace? When did your journey start? How have you been a victim of the culture of war through your life in our crazy country? And how have you turned and tried to become a person of nonviolence and peace? And as you look at the rest of your life, as I'm reflecting, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. With the short time we have left on earth, how can we go deeper into the life of nonviolence, the journey of peace? These are great questions. That led me, to sit at the feet of Daniel and Philip Berrigan, my friends and teachers. And it's just like a matter of days, I always say, if you're going to be with the Berrigans before you have to go and get arrested. And Phil was like, Go get arrested at the Pentagon, kid, and report back to me. It was the way it was. And Dan, I was asking Dan the meaning of life. I was so nervous, 1982. Dan, what's the point of all this again? That's what I blurted out. And he said, oh, it was so helpful. All you have to do is make your story fit into the story of Jesus. And at first I thought, oh, that's so wonderful. I thought, oh my God. You know, he could have said, go and end all wars and nuclear weapons. This is so much better, but maybe even harder and so much more liberating. I invite you to reflect on that. That led me to El Salvador to work with the Jesuits at the university, who sent me out to a refugee camp where the U.S. was bombing the area, and to greet the death squads when they came in, and to have known these great Jesuits, 6 of them who were later assassinated, changed my life. And that led me to walk onto the Seymour Johnson Air Force Base with Philip Berrigan in 1993. You know, by now you've heard I have a long, let's just say I have a problem with recidivism. And like Bill and Steve Kelly and so many good friends here in Seattle, we walked right up to one of the F-15 nuclear fighter bombers, took out a hammer, and I went up to the side of it and hammered once on it like that. Didn't even chip the paint, but as I said to the judge later, Your Honor, I'm just doing what it says in the Bible. Someday, you know, the Holy Prophet, Your Honor, someday, you know, he said, someday these people are going to come along and they're going to beat their swords into plowshares and study war no more. And Jesus gave us that famous commandment, Your Honor. Love your enemies, don't nuke them. That's the actual translation from the original Greek. Yeah, that didn't go over well with the judge either. I'm trying to be humorous about all of this because it's the only way to keep yourself going. What an experience, friends. Really powerful. And we were thrown on the ground. We had 25 soldiers with machine guns at our heads. We joined hands. There were 4 of us. We prayed. And then there were 50 soldiers, and then there were 100 soldiers, and then there were 200 soldiers. Then there were 500 soldiers, and then there were 1,000 soldiers. And we had walked into and shut down the whole annual U.S. National War Games. 10,000 soldiers, and the top 10 generals were all fired. How did these people get right into the center of it? Ours was the 50th of about 90 plowshares actions now. And we were put in jail for, Phil and I, for about 9 months in Bruce and Lynn. Little cell, we never left it. Never went outdoors, never exercised, nothing. It was horrible. Really, really, really terrible. And but we took the gospel and started reading the Gospel of Mark. And then, we took a little piece of Wonder Bread, which we were served for breakfast. And on Mondays, we had those little plastic cups with the grape juice, which I always joke, we found if you hid it in the top of the toilet, it ferments quite nicely. And it was like Jesus was right there with us. I'm just sharing with you my journey. It was so powerful. And I always think there's an inverse proportionality. The more that I try to do, I'm going to change the world and end war, and I'm doing it, the less happens. The more you let go, and your life is over, and you've been destroyed, crushed by the culture, and you walk forward into the darkness, now God can do something. The more happens. Daniel Berrigan always taught me, you only get enough light for the next step. That means one step. Not the day, not the next week, not the next year. But the trick is to keep taking next steps in the dark, in faith. Oh, there's so many stories to share. My trip to Iraq, my work at September 11th at Ground Zero as the coordinator for the Red Cross and the chaplains working with the relatives who lost loved ones. And our demonstrations against the war in Afghanistan, getting kicked out of New York and moving to New Mexico, the poorest state in the country, #1 in everything, including military spending, #1 in nuclear weapons. I was telling Mike from the radio show today, We think there's 2,500 nuclear weapons at the Albuquerque airport. And it's number one in drunk driving, child hunger, suicide, domestic violence, alcoholism. The section in northern New Mexico, hands down the worst place in the United States, more murders than anywhere else, the center of all drugs. And right at the mountain is Los Alamos, birthplace of the bomb, where business is booming, where Obama is still trying to build this state-of-the-art plutonium bomb factory. He's done more for nuclear weapons than anybody since Reagan in 1983. We have our annual peace vigil there, and we put on sackcloth and sit in ashes and take over the whole town of Los Alamos every year in Hiroshima Day. Taking up the story of Jonah in the town of Nineveh from the Bible, to repent of the mortal sin of war and nuclear weapons, and beg the God of peace for the gift of nuclear disarmament, to try to take our work for peace public without judging and condemning, pointing fingers, because we're all in the same boat together, and say, this is not working. We need, and we're so poor and bankrupting and poisoning ourselves, and they're not making us safe. And so we're in the throes of that now. That hasn't gone over very well, but you do what you can. So I come from that. Where I stay in New Mexico, I look out at Los Alamos. And we have, our other friends here tonight can tell you much more detail. Some 15 to 20,000 nuclear weapons still on the planet. But there's 25 wars happening, with the U.S. selling weapons to both sides. But there's 4 billion people in a subhuman extreme poverty. The UN says 1 billion people are starving to death. But we're in the throes of catastrophic climate change, our destruction of the earth. And we were talking this afternoon that the latest report saying within 20 or 30 years, we will force 40% of all creatures into extinction. Last week, the Congressional Record reported that over the next 30 years, the United States government has now committed in its budget to spend $1 trillion to upgrade its nuclear weapons and Trident submarines and weapons of mass destruction. This is insanity besides being unacceptable. It's a world of total violence. It's like we're living in some kind of zombie movie, or whether we're addicted to violence. But that imagery and that language doesn't even work, because it's structured and systemic and institutionalized, and it's holy, it's spiritual, it's the will of God, it's perfectly normal, it's totally legitimate, and it's meticulously legal. The first letter Thomas Merton wrote to Daniel Berg in 1960, look it up, it's incredible. He says, well, when they finally succeed at killing us and blowing up the planet, it'll be totally legal. You and I can't stand for this anymore. And we have to stand up publicly. How? Gandhi and King used this clumsy word nonviolence, and I want to reflect with you about it. And I keep inviting us to ponder, what does it mean? How do you define it? How are you doing on that journey of nonviolence in your life? I always say it begins with the vision of the heart, and that this is the key to the whole spiritual life, or just life, or all organized religion, or theology, or any spirituality. That we're all one. We're all reconciled. Every human being on the planet is your very sister and brother. The gift of peace was given millennia ago. And if you can enter into the spiritual truth of reality of our common unity, my sister, my brother, with every human being, you can never hurt anyone again, or much less kill someone, or be silent and just go about your day to day when there's 25 wars, 15,000 nuclear weapons, 1 billion people starving, catastrophic climate change, and the whole litany of violence that you're all resisting. The prisoners here in town, to torture, racism, sexism, violence against children. So there's nothing passive about this. This is active love, pursuing the truth of our common unity, reconciling every human being, allowing the God of peace to disarm our hearts of the violence within us, that we can be instruments of God's disarming love, standing up publicly, like all our heroes from now on, and saying no and resisting these structures and institutions of mass murder. Practicing, it's just so wonderful. Unconditional, non-retaliatory, all-inclusive, all-encompassing, sacrificial, universal love. We get to love everybody with one catch. There is no cause, however noble, for which you and I will ever again support the taking of a single human life. No, we just got to kill Hitler or Saddam or Osama. No, that's the boundary line of nonviolence. Nonviolence sets boundaries in this culture of violence that we can then begin to discover what it means to be a human being, that we can discover what it means to love and practice universal love and boundless compassion and the peace of God. But it's in this addiction where you have to say no, and we have to do it as a people. So Gandhi says we're just beginning to figure it out. Well, I've been trying to struggle with this forever, and that's why I wrote this book with my friends at Pache Benny, helped me. And here's my take. This is the thesis of the book, The Nonviolent Life, and see what you think about this. I'm not sure you're going to agree with it, but just ponder this one. Nonviolence means 3 simultaneous attributes in our lives at the same time. First, real nonviolence to yourself. Really going to make peace with yourself. Cultivate interior nonviolence. Second, at the same time, we're going to practice meticulous interpersonal nonviolence to every human being on the planet and all creatures and all of creation. Third, at the same time, you have to have one foot in the global grassroots movement of nonviolence. Well, I can see that didn't go over too well. See, my thought is that we're good at one of those, or maybe 2 of those, but we don't want to do all 3. But Gandhi and Dorothy Day and Dr. King were trying to do all 3, and that's what Christ calls us to do in all the world's religions. Like there's a lot of us, or some of us, a lot of church people who are really nice. Nice is not a strong point for me. 32 years of Jesuit education, I better not go there. You know, really peaceful to yourselves and your relatives, and not at all involved in the struggle. That's not the Christian way. It's not nonviolence. On the other hand, there's a lot of us who are really active, really engaged, really working for justice and peace. And we're mad and mean for peace. And it's not working. You know, we're full of junk and violence, and our relationships are not so good. So let me just say a word about that for a moment, to invite you to reflect. Again, where are you on the life of nonviolence? And with your time left, how can you go deeper? Why not? You know, it's not worth for me listening to the media people, the politicians. Let's take our saints and heroes seriously and go forward. I got such a sad letter on Friday from this guy in maximum security prison in Northern California, and he's been reading this book, and he's going, how do I be nonviolent to myself? And then he just starts writing about it. I was beat up as a kid, so I beat up everybody else. And then I beat up everybody in the school, and then I joined a gang, and then we went up and beat up everybody, and we started killing people. Now I'm in life in prison, and now I'm beating everybody up in here. And he goes, you know, now that I think about it, it hasn't worked. I know, it's so touching. It hasn't made me happy. You know, no one has taught him. And we're all victims of wounded people of violence from this culture. And do you want to go forth and be wounded wounders? Or like Henry Nouwen said, be wounded healers? So I like what Thich Nhat Hanh says. Just look deeply within. What's going on inside of you? When you feel that violence, the roots of violence inside you, ponder it. And don't beat yourself up on it. The point is to stop the cycle of violence, which is in each one of us. And to begin to cultivate interior nonviolence. I don't even know if this makes sense, but if you see what I mean, to try to create a space of peace. Actually, what we're talking about are becoming mystics. Only a new kind of dangerous mysticism where your very presence is a threat to empire. To, dare I say, Bangor. You don't even have to say anything. You walk in the room and you get the idea. So how can you let go of your wounds or heal your wounds or let go of your hurts and bitterness and resentments and anger and violence in your prayer and meditation with Jesus, with the God of peace, let it go. Give it away. Forgive everyone who ever hurt you every day from now on. And receive the resurrection gift of peace. Receive God's gift of peace. Sit in the peace and infinite love of God, and you begin to feel less violent, and cultivate this as a daily practice. Friends, if you're going to continue as activists, which you all are doing great things, I'm sure, and you're going to stand up and speak against the Afghan war or the Trident submarine, and there's a cop there or there's a church person yelling at you, and they're going to come at you like this, you've got to be doing your inner work, because theoretically it's going to trigger that stuff from your youth, your violence inside of you, and you're going to want to lash out at that person, but it has nothing to do with that person. It's what happened when you were 5 years old. But if you're processing and constantly working on your inner disarmament and practicing a really strong interior nonviolence, my friend, I just gave a retreat last weekend to a large Buddhist gathering with Roshi Joan Halifax, and she calls this strong back, soft front, as opposed to the American, strong front, but actually pretty weak, the back, We want to be conscious so that when we do step forward publicly, we won't let that trigger the violence within us, the wound, and we can continue to be consciously, mindfully nonviolent. Secondly, we want to practice meticulous interpersonal nonviolence. How you doing with that? And you think of the difficult people in your life, and unfortunately, they become your teachers because they're exposing your violence. You just show up with somebody and you want to slug them. Oh, well, then that's a helpful experience. I'm trying to make you laugh and it's not working. Maybe I triggered some. No, you see what I mean? I think this stuff is really important because we're talking about the world of total war. I mean, if we're not doing this inner work, we have nothing to offer the world. And this is the teaching of all the great peacemakers, and by the way, Jesus. So, to reflect, how can you respond nonviolently to people and to people in your life so that you can really widen your heart to really practice greater love, compassion, to outdoing one another in kindness, and really working on these smaller moments in the day-to-day so that we can really grow and deepen in our spiritual lives in nonviolence and really be people who have really wide hearts of universal love. That's what we need. And we have to widen this to all creatures from now on and really figure out how can be nonviolent to creatures and all of creation. And this is what you're doing, and I want to encourage you. At the same time, to continue to be part of the global grassroots movement. Things are happening. The world is moving. It's bad, but there's so much good happening. 85 nonviolent revolutions the last 30 years, when you think about it. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the people power movement, the end of apartheid, Lima Gaboe in Liberia. You all know her, I hope. Maybe the greatest living peacemaker. She won the Nobel Peace Prize a couple years ago. Liberia, Charles Taylor, 200,000 people massacred. She just said, I call upon all the women to dress in white and let's sit down on the streets and say enough is enough. And he just left. You just can't work with these women. That's powerful, active nonviolence and getting rid of the dictatorship and ending the war. And they're still at it. That's happening around the planet. At least 2/3, maybe more of the planet is personally involved in grassroots movements for justice. And you're in Seattle. This is an important place. You can't give up. I know a lot of you are working. Everybody's got to be involved. I love what Romero said. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. My friends and I are working really hard on this brochure you got, organizing what we call Campaign Nonviolence. I invite you, if you're wondering what to do, or to get involved if you'd like. We're just trying to take nonviolence into the mainstream, and do nonviolence trainings all over the country. And we're leading up to this fall. We're calling for 300 demonstrations around the country, beginning September 21st, International Peace Day, up to the congressional elections. based on the Declaration of Peace, which we did 6 years ago. And we're asking everybody to go to your local federal building or congressional office and do a march or a sit-in, some public witness against war, a lot of people working on the drones, and or poverty. You can take immigration or prison reform or the death penalty or global hunger or the fast going on in Tacoma about Gitmo and so forth and so on, or third and or the environment. And we're going to try to make the connections between all the movements and re-energize the movement. And if you want to get more information, just look up Campaign Nonviolence. But I just encourage you to keep at it. This is how change happens, through grassroots, bottom-up movement building. And I think Jesus was a nonviolent organizer. He was a movement builder. Gandhi says he was the most active person of nonviolence who ever lived. And then poor Gandhi goes on to say, and the only people on the whole planet who don't know that Jesus is nonviolent are Christians. And Gandhi says the Sermon on the Mount is it's the greatest teachings of nonviolence in all of human literature. He read the Sermon on the Mount, parts of it, every morning and every evening for the last 45 years of his life. And he's not a Christian. He's saying, this is my handbook, how to be a human being in a world of total violence. I invite you to do that. And you read the teachings, and there it is. Blessed are the peacemakers. Offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. Be as compassionate as God. Love your neighbor. Love even your enemies. But you could see in Luke chapter 9, he turns and he starts, Jesus, marching toward Jerusalem. Like Gandhi on the Salt March or Dr. King in Birmingham. He's a movement builder. He sends people ahead of him in pairs to proclaim peace and heal everybody and expel the demons of war and empire and say, the reign of God, the new world of nonviolence is coming. And it's so spectacular because he walks into the temple where the religious authorities are working with the empire to oppress all the people and steal their money. And he turns over the tables of the money changers. And he prevents people from coming and going. He does a sit-in. And he's peaceful, nonviolent, doesn't hit anybody, hurt anybody, kill anybody, or drop any nuclear bombs. But wow, is he not passive. He's active, public, and daring, troublemaking, and revolutionary. You know, it's illegal activity on behalf of justice in the name of the God of peace. I've come to the conclusion that everything Jesus did was illegal. He was a one-man crime wave walking through the Roman Empire. So I was talking about this, and forgive me if you heard me before. This is, I still think, the best I can share with you. And when the war in Iraq started again in 2003, I was speaking to a church, and this woman raised her hand, and she said, you know, I just think this is the most beautiful stuff. Nonviolence, that's so interesting to think about. And me, personally, I'm a big fan of peace. But sometimes you just got to kill somebody. In New Mexico, everybody talks like that. You know, and she said, the church is right to throw out the Sermon on the Mount. In the year 315, when Constantine theoretically became Christian and said, you can all kill now and join this army, support the empire. And he turned to Cicero, the pagan, to begin to come up with the just war theory that ended up having the 7 conditions. And now you can bomb everybody for Jesus and crusades. And it's all Christians building the nuclear weapons at Los Alamos. And I said to her, and I invite you to think about this for those of you who are Christian. What happens next in the story? You know, he's in the upper room, the Passover meal. He takes the bread and the cup. My body broken for you, my blood shed for you. If he were a good American, he would say, go break their bodies for me. Go shed their blood for me. No, my body broken for you, my blood shed for you. Do this. That's the art of nonviolence, the willingness to give our lives for suffering humanity. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane. Here come the horrible soldiers to arrest him. Peter's thinking, oh my God, our guy's in trouble. I'm supposed to be the number one in charge. I got to protect him. And he gets a sword to kill because he's thinking If there's ever a just war in all of human history, if violence is ever divinely sanctioned in all of human history, if there was ever a moment to kill, this is it, in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he's right. We got to kill to protect our guy. And just as he goes to kill to save Jesus, the commandment comes down, put down the sword. Friends, those are the last words of Jesus to the church. It's the last thing he said to the men and women, his friends around him. And it's the first time they understood who he is. Peter's going, oh my God, this hippie is so into agape and peace and nonviolence. He's not going to defend himself violently, which means we don't get to defend ourselves violently, which means we're out of here. And they all abandon him and go, I always say, go read Gandhi. Gandhi's our greatest Christian theologian, as Martin Luther King said. Jesus goes deeper into nonviolence because he's working. Every moment for Jesus is like civil disobedience, in your face violence. There's no anger, no resentment, no retaliation. Violence stops here in my body. You're all forgiven, but the days of killing are over. And God raised from the dead, and he says, peace be with you now. You walk the road of nonviolence. It's so fantastic. This is what you and I are trying to do. To be people of active, daring, gospel nonviolence in a world now of total violence. This is the greatest thing we can do with our lives. This is the great hope of the world. Gandhi and King and Dorothy Day were right. For us, especially as Christians, this is the way we can follow Jesus. To be meticulously nonviolent to ourselves. Nonviolence in all our relationships, to all creatures, on all of creation. And to be part of building a new movement. To be heralding a new world without war and poverty and violence. To welcome God's reign of peace and nonviolence. To fulfill your vocations. To be who you already are in the eyes of the God of peace. Peacemakers. The beloved daughters and sons of the God of peace. Thanks very much for listening to me, everybody. Cheers. Oh, thank you.
Just a brief question. I couldn't help but wonder regarding your second category of our relationships with other people and other parts of creation. Are you a vegetarian, or what do you say about eating meat?
Thank you. You read Gandhi, and he started out that way. What happened to me was in 1982, when I came back from Israel, a week later, was grappling with this. I was reading all these books, and one of them was Frances Moore Lappé's Diet for a Small Planet, one of the most important books. And she says, do it for human beings. Well, that's shocking. Do we eat animals? You kill and torture animals? How could that be? Gandhi said the measure of your humanity is the way you treat animals. It's a powerful statement. She said, though, in Brazil, all the grain that's growing there, with people starving, is being shipped to the United States to feed the cattle for McDonald's. Therefore, don't eat meat to help end world hunger. And now the United Nations says, forget that. It has to do with the environment. It's all about saving, so it's all one. So I became a vegetarian in 1982. I urge everybody to do it, to be a vegetarian. Thank you.
Yes, I just want to, I told my daughter, carve on my gravestone, nice is not enough. Based on what you said earlier, nice doesn't quite cut it. You got to be active. So, but my question is a question that is I've been asking and exploring for 30 years. And it's a great mystery, but I'm looking for a definitive answer, so I hope you can do that tonight, all right? But, in Jesus, the military leader who comes up to him who has his ill servant, so he's participating in the oppression of the Jews. Yeah. He's ready to kill any numbers of people who rebel.
Right.
And Jesus said, there's no faith like this in Israel.
Yeah.
There's I just want your reflections on that.
This is great. Was Gandhi right or not? Was Jesus violent or nonviolent? I sometimes think, well, if he's violent, the heck with him. If Gandhi's right and Dr. King is right, now we're getting somewhere. We're just inventing theology and a spirituality of nonviolence, which is just a clumsy word for love and peace and compassion, but it means no killing and all. It's so darn exciting, and I keep investigating it. And with some friends who are here tonight, we keep talking about it. But this is good. I love your question, and I invite you to keep going back to the stories. My text and my advice is just read the 4 Gospels for the next 30 years and then get back to me. It's the most profound story of nonviolence in all of human writing. Okay, the disciples come and say, this guy, the Roman, he built the synagogue. He's really rich. He's really nice. And his servant is ill, and you should help him. You really should do this. And Jesus is like, okay, I'll do it. And he goes there, and the word comes, I'm a military person. I give the word, and it's done. You're not worthy to have you under my house. Just say the word, and the servant will be healed. And Jesus turns and said, I've never encountered this faith in all of Israel. Now, those of you who are scripture scholars know more about this from me. He doesn't say, therefore, I was completely wrong, and the Roman Empire is great, and let's all be good Roman citizens. Which is what I hear a lot of people saying from this one story. He's just saying the guy has faith, and he cured the servant's illness. And then he was executed by the Roman Empire. He was surrounded by 600 drunken Roman soldiers, the whole cohort. When after he was arrested and tried, remember they mocked him and put the purple robe on him. That's what empire does. It tortures and executes activists to make sure the rest of you don't get involved in this. And Jesus is misunderstood as a violent revolutionary. He did the right thing. He was affirming faith. Faith is really the heart of everything for Jesus, and we don't know what he's talking about. Do you really believe in God or not? Do you really believe in Jesus or not? If you really believe in God, what are we afraid of? Let's go do great miracles and change the world as instruments of God. You can do it. Gandhi shows that. But he never supported Rome or the Roman Empire or the oppression and the killing that was happening throughout the outskirts of the empire in Palestine and Galilee. I don't see any of that, and I think that story is misused a lot. That's my humble take on it. I invite you to wrestle with it too. Thanks.
I don't want to embarrass you, but I was Jesuitical since first grade when I put AMDG in my papers through a Jesuit university, and our Jesuit pastor this minute who says hello to you and likes you. But I would like to know, after St. Ignatius's order for 4 centuries have done so much good, how your provincial in Baltimore could kick you out, and that the current Pope in Rome or the Vatican could kick you out. It's, to me, a mystery of all mysteries.
These are deep mysteries. Jesuit mysteries. No, thank you. First of all, I left. So I was a Jesuit for 32 years, and some of you know this and some of you don't, and I'm talking about it. I've gone public with every provincial I had, except for maybe one, which is that 30 people, has been trying to get rid of me for 32 years. From the week I entered, they were on to me. And I'm hesitate to talk about it because it's too painful. It's not funny what I'm sharing with you, so I ask you to respect me. This is a very personal journey, the community I love, the martyrs I knew, my teacher, Daniel Berrigan. We're all suffering through what's happened to me and to others. And I can let other Jesuits speak for themselves. I'll just say, that's my history, which you wouldn't believe. I've written it up and people didn't believe it. My friends read it. And I never talked about it publicly. The things that happened to me. You wouldn't believe it. But in these last 10 years, as I've spoken to a lot of people around the country and around the world, I'm banned and kicked out of 100 dioceses or 200 by many, many bishops. So they're inundating my provincial and other provincials with complaints because of the scandal that I'm against war. And so what happened was I was working in New Mexico having these peace vigils at Los Alamos, and the Archbishop removed my priestly faculties because I was having sackcloth and ashes peace vigils there, which were getting enormous publicity in the state. And he could have lost millions of dollars, because the priest is up there saying, you can't be Christian and work at Los Alamos. By the way, I went in to meet him, and he said, yeah, we need nuclear weapons. I said, the church is actually against nuclear weapons, Archbishop. It's actually pretty clear, I think. No, there are only security. No, I said, no, actually, in the Psalms, it says God is our security. No, God can't protect us. I almost said to him, being a smart aleck, okay, you don't believe in God. Yeah, I didn't say that. And I said, well, Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, love your enemies. And you and I have to help the 20,000 Christians at Los Alamos not be spending their lives preparing to vaporize people. No, you don't have to do what Jesus said. Yeah, and that was a real life-changing moment for me. I got kicked out. The provincial ordered me to Baltimore, where the headquarters is. I'm not allowed anywhere else on the whole planet, he said. I was not given an assignment. It was basically put under house arrest, which is an old Jesuit thing. And no, seriously, they used to have prisons in the old days, And, he said to me, as I've heard every year, why are you in the order? Nobody supports you. Why don't you leave? He said to me, you will leave after 3 years, so why don't you just leave now? And it's so, people say, but your vow of obedience. Well, it's weird when you have your superior saying, leave under obedience. And he can't get rid of me because I'm an elder in the order with final vows. I'm a priest in good standing, but it was affecting my health. And I thought, what should I do? And then it wasn't a choice for me. And so I moved out of Baltimore and was later dismissed. So it was my choice to leave. And I'm hoping to stay a priest, and I'm working with a bishop in California at the moment who wants me to continue my work. So please keep me in your prayers, and the society, that we can all live up to these questions about what does it mean to follow Jesus. Thank you.
Thank you. I really honor your path, what you've done. You talked about middle of September. You'd like us all to be engaged in activism.
Yes.
Are you familiar with, I'm sure you are, the project of David Swanson, David Hartsoe, Paul Chappell?
Yes.
World Beyond War.
Tell us about it.
Could you speak about it?
You say a word about it. Tell us
Okay, that's what I came up to do, to tell everybody, but I thought you would do it for me.
It's really terrific, and I hope everyone will be part of it. We have to support every good cause in the world, and these are friends of mine, and it's a great vision. So go on.
I think it's the most exciting activism that I've heard about recently. It's a project to abolish war. Not this one or that one, but all war. And David Swanson has a website, davidswanson.org, where you can download his book, War No More, for $2. I'll lend you the $2 if you need, okay? And the website that he and the others are encouraging people to look at, to sign up, to put your name on, is called worldbeyondwar.org. I think I got it right. Yeah, okay. So I encourage people to do that.
It's great, and we're working closely with them with campaign nonviolence.org, and it's the same kind of thing. Can I reflect with you for a minute on that?
Absolutely.
Because you go, well, that's just ridiculous. Beyond war. I don't know if you know who's the great, Tony, who just died last week, a great activist in England, but who's the great Christian peace activist in England these many last decades? The Berrigan of England is Bruce Kent, and he started a group like that years ago, and he's been working on it. And I used to think about that a lot. And then I came to the conclusion, and I was reading Arundhati Roy, who's a really great thinker and helps us to reflect on what is it we're going through, that one of the great casualties of the culture of war is the loss of the imagination. This is very important, because you could look at Jesus and say, what an imagination. Or you think of the imagination of God. These are deep things. This is good. And then I got thinking, the abolitionists. Now, these people are totally ridiculous, and what an imagination they had as activists to come forward and say, we are announcing the abolition of slavery. I mean, that's just total lunacy. And they had their lives threatened, their homes burned down, they lost their jobs, and they said, no, a new world of equality is coming. And they lifted up a vision that people began to organize around. We have to stand on their shoulders and claim them as our ancestors, and our job is even bigger. And this is what David Hartsoe and I talk about all the time, because what we are doing is standing up and saying, we are announcing the abolition of war. And poverty and hunger and nuclear weapons and torture and executions and catastrophic climate change and all violence. And you try saying that publicly sometime. People think you're totally nuts, and you go, no, a new world of nonviolence is coming. To translate that into the ancient Koine Greek, the reign of God is at hand. This is what we are doing. We have to help people in Seattle reclaim your imagination, or talk about a day when there is no more Trident submarine base. You know, and people wouldn't have to be fasting and protest at the prison. And all the other injustices going on in Seattle and Washington. A new kind of nonviolent Seattle, but a nonviolent nation and a nonviolent world. And it will only happen through grassroots movement building, which is why I support World Beyond War and Campaign Nonviolence and all your own projects. I just encourage you. Thank you.
Could I reflect with you something that inspires about how we ended slavery? And it's this wonderful book, Bury the Chains. I'm just forgetting the author's name. It's about how a dozen people got together in London in a printing office.
Oh, gosh.
And in 1789, I think, something like that,
yeah.
and decided we need to end slavery.
I know.
And it's in the Bible, and it's been always, and blah, 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 and what economically is impossible. And within, 30, 40 years, it happened without a war before we did.
The Quakers. But they were activists, and they were organized, and they were totally committed.
Right.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah.
So this reminds me of Howard Zinn, the great historian, the author of A People's History of the United States. And he was in Santa Fe shortly before he died, and he was saying, my whole life, I realized... The Archbishop, no. The provincial, I'm a smart Alex. God has entered. You think of it, the abolitionists, the suffragists, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, he says to me, they all have one thing in common. From the beginning, the middle, to the very end, they were all hopeless. And then there was a breakthrough. And Howard Zinn said, why? We know now historically in our own national history, the great Howard Zinn said, because in every movement, the abolitionists, the suffragists, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, ordinary people did one or two or three things for their cause, for the struggle for justice and peace, every single day, even though they knew they weren't going to live to see the victory they were giving their lives for. They kept at it anyway. That's when nonviolence is contagious. And it's going to work. It's the power of God. That's why you and I have to keep at this. And why it's good to reflect on the abolitionists and this history. And I'm very interested in what those British people did. It's so astonishing, and I could talk much more about this, but so thank you. Maybe the next person could speak. It's great stuff to think about.
I came over to the U.S. as a student in my early 20s, and I have a question about... I have the impression that people are very afraid to be arrested over here, and I'm curious why, or how can we overcome that fear? And the second thing is there really a stigma if you're arrested after you're released? Are you stigmatized?
It depends, certainly, yeah, with some people. Well, first of all, the question of fear is so important. I mean, Gandhi says you cannot practice nonviolence and be afraid. So he professed a vow of nonviolence and a vow of fearlessness. The one thing in the four Gospels that's repeated the most is do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid. And what if we just said, okay, I'll take him at his word? Well, that's really something. Then you have to practice and be doing your work. I was reflecting today on what are we afraid of? And I do a lot of journaling. I used to do that. I mean, I still journal, but about my fears. To work at it. I'm afraid of public speaking. I still am. I have a book. There was a Gallup poll that came out 10 years ago about the fears, greatest fears that Americans have. Number 1 was public speaking. Number 2 was death. It's true. I'm afraid of flying, and afraid of this person and that person, and to try to process it and work it through, and if especially death. And that's when you get into, do you believe in God or not? And God, and as a Christians, I believe our survival is already guaranteed. Resurrection means no more death, no more violence. We don't cooperate with death. That's why I like the poet Edna St. Vincent Millay, who said, I shall die, but that is all I shall do for death. Amen. So to get over our fears, and so for me that meant working in soup kitchens and going to prisons and working in homeless shelters and going to war zones, and it helped to be in El Salvador, and then to meet these heroic people who are way beyond the fear of death. And then you have your peace group and your community and you're praying, and the fear lessens, and you keep taking journeys. And when you're really afraid, someone in your group is not so afraid. And when they're afraid and you're not so afraid, you can help them. In community together, we can walk forward. I don't know about the stigma for arrest. For some people, yes. And I'm not saying everybody has to get arrested or hammer on nuclear weapons, though if you're interested, see me afterwards. I'm just saying, as I said tonight, everybody's got to do something. You've got to be involved in the movement, and in whatever way you can. And we need committed people with good hearts and a lot of love, really making the spiritual connections with the public activism work for justice and peace, whatever way you're going to work, because it's all one. What's so amazing about Gandhi is that by 1942, he has 350,000 activists in prison in India. And I went and spent time in India with Arun Gandhi, his grandson. We met lots of the survivors, the older. And they're telling these incredible stories about this nature of nonviolence, how it can become a spiritual explosion with political implications, so that the stigma is if you're not arrested. You mean you weren't arrested to protest the British Empire? Oh, I can't. I'm sorry. You wouldn't have anything to do with them. And then everybody was involved. And then your parents were part of it, and your children were part of it. It's like the Birmingham campaign when the kids are marching, and then that's the end of segregation. That's what we're looking for, is the Satyagraha truth force. Things like that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming to Seattle.
Oh, thanks for having me.
In Western Washington, we have a population of 4 million people, and there's at least 1 million houses and offices and buildings. But how many of them are actually anti-war places? Why don't we have any anti-war establishment that has full-time staff, we have an employment of probably 1 million people or something. They're all doing something full-time. Should there be a full-time anti-war office with 10 or 20 people in it? And what would they be doing if there was such a... why isn't there? That's what I don't understand.
Well, thank you. I'm not from here, and I try not to tell you what to do, but since you're asked. Well, Ground Zero. Anybody here from Ground Zero Center? Thank you all so much. A round of applause for Ground Zero. It's more than a full-time job. It's a full-time life, and you're living a life of permanent nonviolent resistance. But we need to do that in every which way. So, these are just great questions, and I invite you, that's what I'm trying to do, is to reflect where you are on your life journey. and then reflect on what's happening in Seattle and how can we go farther, new ways to make a more nonviolent Seattle and a nonviolent Washington and a healthier, more just community, which really needs to happen. And of course, to be the light to the rest of the country and the world. That's what, you were such exemplars in the WTO protest years ago. Of course, there should be lots of full-time anti-war. Every church in Seattle should be completely about trainings and nonviolence and training people to go to work to end war, hunger, environmental destruction, and violence of all kinds. That was the point of all of poor Jesus' life, it seems to me. But, I encourage you, if you're not with a peace group, get one. And you don't know where to go, join Ground Zero. Give money to the peace and justice movements here in Seattle so they can hire more people. These groups we're mentioning, Beyond War, Campaign Nonviolence, we have shoestring budgets. And the major national peace and justice groups are collapsing because there's no funding, especially since the recession. Well, you know all of that, but I invite you to reflect on how can you help reinvigorate, refund, and let's build a stronger movement with actual infrastructure and be serious and professionals about this. Things like that come to mind. Thank you. Do we have time for one or two more? It's about, I have 8:15, maybe, yeah. You're being very nonviolent. Yeah. Wes, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, John. So to honor our host, Rich, I have to ask this in the form of a question, right? So John, do you know what we're doing on Good Friday this year?
No, what are you doing?
Thank you for asking. I said to Sue I was going to go up and make an announcement. She said it has to be in the form of a question. So for about the 20th year in a row, we'll be doing the proclamation of the Passion according to John. But usually we do it at the Federal Building, and a number of you, Bert and others, have been part of that every year. But this year, we're discerning the question of the crucifixion of the earth and through climate change, et cetera. So we don't have a place yet, but we may well be along the Duwamish River, which is, of course, named for the people whose land it was originally here, and through not only Boeing's work, but all of our activity. We don't even think about the fact that every time we drive our car and put the brakes on, we put toxic pollution on the ground that goes in the water and kills things. So even if we weren't using gasoline, the fact that we even have brakes in our cars that have toxic chemicals. So it's just, as you've written and talked about, it's embedded into the fabric of our lives. So we just encourage you, if you're interested, anybody here, to take a step in response to what John's doing, to contact some of us who are planning our annual Good Friday thing. Be part of the discernment with us and keep in touch. And we'd love to have a lot of people be part of that public witness.
How can people get in touch with you?
You can email me at wes@abideme.net. We don't have a formal group doing this right now. We're doing it also in connection with Seattle Mennonite Church, which is our home church. So you can also contact Seattle Mennonite Church. I think Melanie's here as one of the co-pastors, so you can contact Melanie. And there's several of our, anybody who's in Seattle Mennonite want to raise their hand right now so people can know who you are. But it's not just a project of Seattle Mennonite. A lot of people here who come from a lot of different traditions have been part of that. So just grab me afterwards and give me your email or some way to contact you, and I'll be glad to include you in our plan.
Thanks, Wes. And I think there's a promoter in Seattle for Campaign Nonviolence. Does anyone know who that person is? Well, if not, it would be on the website, campaignonviolence.org. And anyway, I'm hoping one or two or three of you would begin talking now about organizing something in conjunction with all these other national groups this fall, whether it's going to be a march or a sit-in or a vigil, and under what themes, and really take it into the media and through all the churches and really invite everybody to come out for this, because it's going to be happening around the country. Thanks, Wes. Yeah.
Well, thanks, John. I'm not going to make you talk, since I'm from the shameless marketing division of Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action. Just a joke there, but my name's Leonard, and I am from Ground Zero, and John mentioned something that really resonates for me, and that is that no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And at Ground Zero Center, it's because of the actions of this grassroots group, people just doing whatever they can, to make it happen for 36 plus years. And right now, we have a $100 billion submarine program that's in the offing, and we're trying to stop it, among other things, including a second explosives handling wharf and everything else surrounding nuclear weapons at Bangor, 20 miles as the crow flies from Seattle. So we welcome participation. Yes, everyone doesn't have to go out and get arrested. There's something for everyone. There's so many different roles to play, and each one is really, really important. And we can do something about this, and we must. So I just welcome you to grab a newsletter. If you haven't read our newsletter, it's on the back table out there, Ground Zero newsletter, and you can learn all about it and get involved. So
Thanks, Len.
thank you, John.
Thank you.
Hi, Rich said it was okay if I ask a question. So you had talked about being a person not wanting to harm life, and I asked this knowing that these are really delicate places in life. Does that place, can you reflect on beginning and end of life issues, death with dignity, and abortion and things like that? Does that connect for you in that, or can you speak to those things from the voice of a mystic and an activist?
I don't know that I'm a mystic, but these are the questions to think about. You know, what does nonviolence mean? How wide is our vision? I mean, so I cannot see how abortion is not violent. Did that come out right? It's real violence to me, and no one has been able to convince me otherwise. But I have so many problems with the so-called pro-life movement, who are I know a lot of people, bishops included, who are for executing people or bombing children or building nuclear weapons, and they're for pro-life. So I'm trying to approach it all as a holistic view of nonviolence, and I totally appreciate the question, and everybody struggles with it. I think, the vision of Cardinal Bernardine really appeals to me, of the seamless garment, that we are trying to be against every form of violence and death as a social methodology, and that they're all connected, the metaphors and means of death. And that's why I was putting it so stupidly and simply, nonviolence to ourselves, nonviolence to all others and all creatures in creation, and being part of the global movement. So, war and nuclear weapons, but poverty, but racism and sexism, but the children, the unborn and those dying. How can we become more nonviolent? And I've gotten in so much trouble talking about this because I don't believe a lot of people who are against abortion. I just don't believe them. I see a lot of people saying things, and their actions show to me that they don't care about women or about children. And I hear a lot of people who would say other things that show that they care about the whole world. And anyway, what does this vision of nonviolence entail? For me, it's a wide vision, and it involves every aspect of life, our personal behavior, sexuality, relationships, children, nonviolent child rearing, sexism, the violence of men and the structure of patriarchy. All that's got to go. To how do you die nonviolently? What is the nonviolent way with the community around? They're really serious questions, and I think the church is doing better on that end of it, but I invite you to pray over it and get together with your friends and keep talking about it. Maybe that's enough? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
How do we communicate with the Catholic Church against war? Is there a place we can email, we can write, we can constantly make our voices heard in the Catholic Church against war?
Was there another question out there somewhere? I don't mean to be a smart aleck. I've been grappling with that question my whole life too. My thought, if the church is against war and killing, a lot of these other questions will be resolved. Once the church completely returns to the nonviolence of Jesus, then we have to do a lot of changing, beginning with the equality of women and men in the structures, and our understanding of the body and sexuality and abortion and children and death. And I mean, everything's going to change. And now we'll be able to get somewhere. What do we do about that? That's what we're talking about tonight.
I guess my question was, is there a place or the Vatican or some,
Okay, see now,
some
I don't
place
think,
that we
I
can
don't think,
directly be in contact?
what is the church? You're talking about the institutional church
Yes.
and the Vatican, and this is the church here. Wherever Christians are gathered together, that is church. And that's the administration of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, if you're asking how can you engage the administration of the Roman Catholic Church, I would say, why do you want to do that right now? I personally, I'm just seriously reflecting with you, I never really put my energies there. It's strange because then I met Pope John Paul II, and I think he'd been reading my books, and it was quite shocking. And I had a few things to say to him. And recently someone gave me the secret mailing address of Pope Francis. Well, I thought, oh, great. So I wrote him a long letter, like I'm smoking a cigarette. Here's what you need to do. Call the Third Vatican Council and throw out the just war theory and write encyclicals about Jesus and nonviolence and the Sermon on the Mount. This is what we're going to focus on the next 100 years and make nonviolence the center of the church. But I say that because, we have to live that ourselves. And if we want to change Rome, I found, really, really help make the church, the church of peace and justice here in Seattle. And you see that that's what happened with Archbishop Hunthausen, it seemed to me. It was the community and Jim and Shelley Douglas, the leadership of Ground Zero that met with him and that made him have such an effect and it really had a global effect on the church. You can write letters to the Pope, but I personally don't suggest putting your energy there. I suggest putting your energy in the Gospels and practicing what we're talking about. My friend Steve Kelly, some of you know, was having dinner with Daniel Berrigan about 10 years ago, and they were so depressed about the war. And Dan said, oh, well, you know what Jesus would say? And Steve said, oh, you name dropper you. In the end, I think the focus has to be on Jesus. We could talk about organizing a movement, an economic boycott of the Vatican, cutting all funding to the Vatican until these certain changes happen. Maybe we should be doing that. How did the Catholic Church in the United States change over 40 years? It just doesn't happen like that. It was organized and funded by a right-wing Republican Party. We know that historically now. And it works. If you're going to change the whole country, you got to get the universities so the students aren't marching. Got to get the media. We did that. Got to get our politicians. We got that. You got to go for the churches. And they created the moral majority and Pat Robinson. That was all fun. They went after the bishops. It was brilliant. Should we be doing that? Maybe. Organizing a movement. But meanwhile, so many people are suffering and dying around the world. That's why let's take Jesus seriously, build a movement, and really, it seems to me, follow him through nonviolent resistance and become the church. And then as we change, and we change Seattle, it'll have an effect. That's how I see change happening. I may be wrong. Friends, I thank you so much for listening to me and welcoming me and all the great things you're doing for justice and peace. Carry on. Amandla. God bless you. You're doing great.